So first things first, who knows what Dataverse is? That's
I'm
good.
sorry about that.
And who's been working with GitHub Copilot, in anger, not just having a play with it? Okay, that's good. So welcome and thank you for coming to our session, Slaying the Dataverse Dragon with Copilot. So promptly focused, looking at Dataverse challenges, um, you know, with me as your AI obsessive, your data and AI enablement, and Mo to introduce himself.
Hi all, I'm Mo. I'm one of the principal architects working with Curve Digital. I focus mainly around data engineering, so sort of my team and everyone sort of does data engineering.
And we've also got 3 virtual cast members today as part of your fight crew. So GitHub Copilot, ChatGPT-4, and SonarLint, the least loved out of all of them. But we've got a crew of 5 today as part of our presentation and demo. So in terms of the content we'll be sharing, our talk is in 2 halves. So the first half is with Mo, talking about dynamics, Dataverse, and various challenges we have as data people trying to get data out of Dataverse in particular. Augmenting a traditional dev process with multi-tool approach that uses AI to drive it, that's the second half. That's really why I'm coming into it.
Okay.
But really, if you look at this, what we're trying to do is show quite an interesting case study. Learning, working out in the open, given the various recruitment challenges and bureaucracy within all of our organizations. The point we're really trying to show is how AI can empower organizations to be just a little bit more productive. So with that, over to Mo.
So I'm going to start with a very, very brief introduction. What is Dataverse? What is Microsoft Dataverse for people who haven't used it? Very briefly, it's a back-end system. It's a database that powers all these brilliant tools, and it's really good. It's a managed platform. It's a database that you don't need to worry about your security. You don't need to worry about your indexing. You don't need to worry about scaling up. All of that is taken care of by Microsoft. It's great for us as DBAs or for people working in DBAs. As I say, it does support a lot of stuff. So we in Curve Digital, we use it quite a lot with Microsoft Dynamics 365. And out of the box, it comes out with unified data. I know every time what my tables are going to be called. I know what my schema is going to be called. I know all of that regardless of what installation I've got. Great for end users. It comes in with a lot of built-in tools, so you can have your data validation, your workflows, and all of that built in with low and no code at all, just basically clicks on a button. So for end users, for developers, it's a godsend. It is really, really good to use. So saying that, where's the dragon? Why do we call it a dragon? We, data people, it is really difficult for us to use. It's on a managed shared platform. So you're on a platform managed by Microsoft. It's shared with other clients, and as a result, Microsoft quite rightly need to put some limits to how much you use it. So quite often, if we need to do bulk data processes in Dataverse, you're going to get, or you need to work with understanding that there is limitation. You've got limitations for how many API calls you make, how much data you pull out, how much data you pull in, how many users are pulling data in and out. And this is sort of one of the options. It comes out of the box with a lot of connectors. When we looked at the previous slide, we could see it comes with connectors. So we can connect Power BI to it. It uses OData. It talks to the Dataverse in the back. It's slow, it's clunky, but it works for basic reporting. Well, I said it serves a lot of purposes. So if we look at any of the tables, it's got hundreds and hundreds of columns. We're going to see one of these tables when we move through the demo. In reality, an implementation, for example, if we look at an account table, it might be using 3-4 columns, but you've got the whole 300 columns available or 250 columns available. This translates if we're doing data modeling, if we're doing integration with other data sources, you've got lots of columns and you need to know which ones you need to choose. You've got lots of redundant data in there. I've put in there, you've got no direct access to the data. And what I mean by this, if you're using tools like Azure Data Studio, if you're using SSMS, you can connect to it. So Dataverse comes with a TDS, an endpoint which you can connect, SQL endpoint you can connect to it. But it's, again, very limited. You can't run a query for more than, I think, 3 minutes. You can't bring more than X number of records. You've got a lot of limitation to doing that. Microsoft was absolutely brilliant. A few years ago, Dataverse, or what it was at the time called CDS at the time, used to come out of the box with a tool that was absolutely brilliant called DES, and that effectively mirrors your data between Dataverse and a standard SQL server. A lot of our clients loved it because a lot of our clients, even though we do digital transformation for them, they are still classic. They are still using the tools which we've been using for years, and they want an SQL server. So out of the box, it used to come with DES, absolutely brilliant. It used to refresh every 15 minutes, but it did the job. That's been deprecated. Microsoft have replaced it with
Synapse Link.
Synapse Link for Dataverse, and it comes again with a lot of limitations. It throws data out in a data lake, but it's not great for a lot of cases. Lastly, I've put high cost of storage because that comes really, really relevant as we move on. Dataverse charges you by gigabyte, and effectively it charges about £22 per gigabyte of storage. So quite often, more often than none, you would want to split your data, have some in Dataverse, your operational data in Dataverse, the rest of the data you're going to offload somewhere else. Again, great. And out of the box, it understands virtual entities and it can bring data and show it on screen. But what comes when you want to do some more deep analytics and you want to join these tables, you want to join them with something external, going to the no direct access and your complex data APIs, you really can't do this. Out of the box, you can't. You can use Power BI and you can do your modeling there, but you're limited. What we do have, and yeah, sorry, that's the dragon we're talking about here. That's where we're stuck with this dragon. More often than not, our clients do need data. They need the data to come out and be surfaced in either SQL Server, in a Cosmos DB, in a blob storage, and whatever it is. And Ed and I think, for years, have been sort of struggling with this, looking at clients and saying, okay, how can we do this for you? We've got at any point maybe 5, 6, 7 live projects running at the time, and each of them come with the same requirements. Some of them say, I want it in SQL, some in Cosmos, but at the end of the day, I want the data out of Dataverse in somewhere that I can access. So we came up with this pretty diagram. I think it's pretty anyway, which is effectively you've got Dataverse on top. You've got your API, you've got an API that sits on top of Dataverse. It reads the data, sends it to a service bus, and then there's a function app that reads this data. You've got connectors which connect you to things like Cosmos, Azure SQL, into Azure Data Lake, or any other connector you want. That was brilliant, really, really good. The only problem, I can't write code. Ed can't write code. We're not developers. As with any organization, we have a process for doing this. Which slide have we got? Yeah. We'd effectively start off by identifying the issue. We did. We quantify the cost. We say how much it's costing us at the moment, how much it's going to cost us. We write a proposal. We write a TA, or a draft TA at that point, technical architecture documentation. We go to our TDA. We convince them that this is a brilliant product. They say, yep, that's absolutely fine. We go back to our bosses and say, I need money. I need effectively to fund this project. And with cases like this, to be honest, we're okay. We'd go for it. However, reaching that isn't the end of the story. We'd start then the development and the normal development lifecycle, start by design, writing some stories on ADO or whichever tool we're using at the time. Developers start. They usually come back at that point and tell me, Mo, you're an idiot. You've got no idea what you're doing. This is not going to work. You need to start again. We do this, and It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. I'd say maybe about 7, 8 months to get this up and running. Maybe not that long. However, my big issue with this, I don't like wearing trousers. And to attend these meetings, I have to wear trousers. I've got to put my shorts on. I much prefer working like this. That's me on a normal working day. So I thought, okay, I've heard that was back in November, December time, just before Christmas. And ChatGPT came up, and everyone was talking about ChatGPT. I started playing with ChatGPT. Oh, I wonder if it can help me. At that point, that's what I used ChatGPT for. I'd go to a client meeting, and I really hate just sitting and talking in meetings. So if we've got a good meeting or the program's going well, things are going well, I just ask it to give it to me in a form of a haiku. It works, it makes people laugh, and does it. Or worse, when the project isn't going well, say, can you write it in a poem so I can write it to my manager and he doesn't tell me off, and try and make it sound cheerful. And it was absolutely brilliant. It does that for me. It made my meetings a little bit nicer. So we thought, no, actually, let's try and use it for something more productive. Let's get ChatGPT to write me some code. Let's see what it does. It worked. I started off, told it, can you design me a system to read change tracking, entity management, and write the data into an SQL Server database? It was brilliant. In about 2 seconds, it wrote me a lot of code. Again, I remind you, I'm not a .NET developer. I can read it. I can read .NET code. I can read my code from my team, but I can't really write it to save my life. I looked at it. Oh, that's brilliant. How can I put it in a code? And it showed me. I wrote it. It broke. It didn't run. So I was a bit disappointed. And at that point, I thought, OK, let's try another LLM. Let's try another thing. GitHub had their own copilot, that little thing at the right. Is it a robot? I don't know. That thing over there. So I thought, let's give it a try. Installed it, put it on Visual Studio, and got it to review the code. And it was absolutely brilliant. It started actually saying, you need to change this here, you need to change that. And very quickly, I started getting something that works, something that I can actually, rather than writing my TA and doing all of that, I still need to do that, but I can quite quickly get to the funding bit, get to my boss, our boss, and just say, well, have a look at this. It works. It's shit. Sorry. It's awful. I wrote it. So the quality of it isn't great, but it works. We've got a proof of concept. We've got a pilot up and ready. I can give it to my developers, and they don't, that bit where they go back and tell me, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're doing, is a lot easier. I've given them code that works. It's not very clean. It's not great, but it's a code that works. I can give it to them and say, guys, make that work. And that's what happened. That's what the guys, I work with absolutely brilliant developers. The problem is having the right people at the right time and having that process and having them available to actually work with me. By giving them this, by giving them, and we'll have a look at the code, by giving them that, we sped up that. We made it a lot quicker. It didn't replace my developers. Nothing will, mainly because ChatGPT is really polite and doesn't tell me you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about. Instead, it actually just keeps talking and just showing me stuff. I'm going to actually skip to that because I don't like PowerPoint, but this effectively, again, that's a picture generated by ChatGPT. It effectively tells us a little bit story about my journey with it. I started off with this idiot over there who just kept pointing me random places. I'd say, can you write me a code to do this? And say, yep, here you go. But it doesn't work. And it sounds really convincing. We took that and we said, OK, actually, you know what? I'm going to get it, ChatGPT, Copilot, to talk to each other. And I actually got them to automated talking to each other. So one of them reviews the other's code and then comes back with a suggestion and so on. That ended me with the maze here, where it didn't know where to stop. It just carried on and on and on. Both of them carried on, and it just went completely off topic. And it started going into that phase with the magic mushrooms over there, where it was actually hallucinating. It was just giving complete rubbish. Ed, when he starts, he's going to talk to you a lot more about these hallucinations. It is an actual term. They don't eat magic mushrooms, but they do hallucinate LLMs. Eventually, at the end, we reached the dragon, and we decided it's actually time to slay the dragon and time to work it. The demo, and you will notice here that I'm actually using my dev environment, and it works. It costs pennies. The model we ended up, excuse me, I beg your pardon. We ended up, as I said, with a config-driven application. So if we look here, all I need to do to get this to work is give it a connector. This is an example of a connector, where tell it what type it is. So we can expand this, as I said, and we'll have a quick look at that. We can expand it as much as I want. I give it a connection string. How do you reach that place? The application does the rest. The application, when it starts, it goes, oh, you've got a new connector. It's of this type. I understand this type. I'm going to go initialize your database. In cases, for example, with SQL Server, it's going to go in, do supporting stored procedure. It's going to build my tables, my tables. It's going to do all of that for me. It's going to put my indexes, the stuff that I know I will need regardless what happens. After that, after you create your connector, all you've got to do is give it details of the entities. So here's a good example. This is, I'm saying, I want the entity called account, which is a table in D365. And I don't want the whole thing. I don't want the 134 columns. For this database, all I want... I'm terribly sorry, I'm fasting, so my voice will keep sort of going a little bit funny, and I do apologize about that. I said, for this table, for this database, I want the account ID, the name, and the telephone one. And I'm telling it, push this data into this connector, which we had a look at. I've created another configuration where I said, I want this data to go into SQL connector 2. And I'd like this, this is not a very sort of critical data, so I can specify that this table into this destination, I want it every 30 minutes. I don't want it to refresh very often. However, this one is a transactional one, so I want it run every 30 seconds. So every 30 seconds, I'd like to refresh my data. The code behind it, if anyone understands code, I'm really sorry. This is not mine. So it's ChatGPT. Don't judge me on quality of it. But if we look at it, we've effectively implemented interfaces here. And each interface, which is our connector, is very simple. It's a method. How do you upsert data into that place? So how do you get data from A to B? How do you connect to that place using the connection string, which we looked at? And effectively, how do you initialize? Some databases, like SQL, likes to be initialized. You would want to create your tables, your columns, and everything in there. No SQL stuff, you might want to create your container and leave it at that. So these implementation, you decide in your connector, which you get to publish as a NuGet package. The application goes in, pulls the NuGet package, knows how to connect, knows how to do it. Anyone can add more connectors. So 2 weeks down the line, we get a client that uses Snowflake. I don't know why, but they've decided to use Snowflake. We can just add a connector for Snowflake. I need to create maybe 20, 30, 40 lines of code for a connector, how to connect, how to upsert data, and off you go. You add configuration, it works. I don't need to compile the application again. And this is the concept which I was trying to get our developers to get to. You will tell very quickly as I'm fumbling along here, again, I am not a developer, so I keep figuring out what I need to do when. Just want to start both of them. Oh yeah, I start both of them. So as you see, when it starts, and I'm intentionally sort of doing it in debug so we can see it as it goes, what this is doing is going into I'm going to stop the demo because I'm not connecting. Ed, if you want to take here, we'll loop back to the demo. We'll have a look, but I've noticed my SQL database has died. So I'm going to revive it while Ed sort of takes from here.
Sure. Thanks, Mario.
Sorry, Ed.
So I think the story we've heard is, I think Mo does himself down because what he's built actually works. We'll see that shortly towards the end. And I think that there's a sort of debate, a philosophical debate about that's sort of affecting the code movement in terms of quality versus speed of build, especially when you've got the tools such as Copilot, where you can effectively regenerate your whole application so quickly. And ultimately, that's where low code has been taking us for a long time, anyway, in my opinion. As a as a technologist of some form. So, but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we have a GitHub. If you are interested in the code, we can share it afterwards, so you can see it for yourself. But what I'm doing today is really just trying to unpack the learnings from Mo's journey as his, as my internal client, as his data and AI enablement person. So unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past 18 months, you'll be aware there's a massive arms race going on out there. People buying GPUs by the billions of dollars. And for the likes of Google, Meta, OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral, there's a whole list of big name companies that are all fighting for the same thing. And they're producing some pretty amazing solutions, driven by more and more powerful GPUs. NVIDIA Blackwell announced just a couple of weeks ago, where your AI chips are basically increasing in performance exponentially. And therefore the power they give you in terms of training these solutions, the inference that they can do, is also going through the roof. And that's not to put aside the explosion of data that's been occurring for the past 20 years or so. But I think if you're looking at, using these types of solutions, although you've got loads of choice, there are some guardrails that you will need to think about if you're a developer working in any sort of enterprise. And simply that's because you're not just concerned about capability. Unfortunately, you have to make sure it costs a reasonable amount of money. You have to be able to get it up and running in a reasonable amount of time, so you're not losing too much effort that way. There are safety considerations, and every corporation, every enterprise, no matter how small, you've got some sort of compliance concern. You shouldn't be necessarily just throwing your code out there for all to see. And if you were around yesterday, Scott Bell had a really interesting talk specifically about the compliance risks, which I found very interesting. So zooming forwards, if you look at the landscape with just a very rough kind of top chumps style assessment versus the obvious choices out there, and it became quite apparent quite quickly, hands down, that OpenAI, which is the OG, won by a huge margin. Generally, actually, at the moment, its models aren't necessarily the most powerful. You've got Claude 3, that's just come out, which based on the benchmarks is ahead, on a few different measures. However, when it comes to tooling choice, integration, OpenAI is just so far ahead of the others. It's got ecosystem really sewn up. And also it's got good safety, compliance policies at work. The landscape is changing rapidly. At the moment it's fairly clear cut that it's just ahead by a massive margin. So one of the things that you should be concerned about when you look at performance is, although lots of tools are based on the same LLM, the results vary. And we'll come on to the next slide to explain why that is. But quite obviously, 3.5 is much quicker, but actually the performance isn't as good. 4 has been the best, but it's very, very slow, and also very, very expensive if you're accessing it directly through the OpenAI or Azure hosted solutions. In comparison, it's roughly 60 times more expensive, and it's roughly 60 times slower as well. So I guess that makes sense. But if you're looking at GitHub Copilot, there are limitations there. So if you throw, for instance, how do you slay dragons, it won't even entertain the question because there are certain guardrails built into that platform that prevent that response, which is linked to the safety aspect. So pretty complicated looking diagrams coming up. I'm not going to go through this in mind-numbing detail. So I think the main thing to take away from this is your GPT architectures, they are based on these transformer architectures. The T in GPT stands for transformer. And they've been trained on billions of items of data. The information I have is that GPT-4 is trained on 70 billion bits of information. That's the parameters that you read about. But after they've been trained, there's an element of tuning going on. Tuning's not quite the right word. It's called preference optimization. So someone has, unfortunately, people have optimized these based on their response, based on inputs. They've then chosen particular preferences, and that's fed back into these encoder architectures to give you what you want when you're giving it your input. And there's also that element of policies being applied where, developers of these systems, they want to make sure that users are safeguarded appropriately, based on the application. They may have particularly strong guardrails, as you might have seen in that Copilot example. It's much more restricted in terms of the output back. So if you're really interested in stuff, we've got like a whole separate presentation that goes into this in a lot more detail. The main takeaway is speaking to LMs is a bit of a science, and you have to be able to talk to them in the right way to get the right output.
I can tell you, it's not. You can, sorry, Ed, I think you can quite easily ask one of your LMs, you can ask ChatGPT, when I was talking to you and I said, I kept going down a rabbit hole, you can ask it a question. You can ask it any question you like in a normal language, and it will give you an answer. It's up to you, really. I think if we look at sort of Ed's previous slide and looking at the different models, looking at the big difference between the two we're focusing on today, Copilot, GitHub Copilot and ChatGPT. ChatGPT is very generic. It's got loads of data in there, which when you ask it a question, it could be me, it could be any of you, or it could be my 7-year-old. And it's going to give an answer. It doesn't know who it's talking to yet. So it's going to give you an answer. Like when Ed asked it, how do you slay a dragon? It said, yeah, use a magic wand, do this, do that. It's quite funny. It's nice. When it comes to asking it a more particular question, I need it to be a bit more specific. I want to tell it, I want to ask you a question and focus your knowledge. Don't look at everything you know. Focus your knowledge on this. When you're talking to me, I'm Mo, I'm a developer, I need to introduce myself a little bit. I'm not Alfie, my 7-year-old, and I'm not Peter, my puppy. So when you are answering me, focus your answer. Give me an answer which helps. If I knew what Ed is going to talk to you about, I would have saved myself a lot of time. So, sorry, Ed. Okay, I get excited occasionally. I did tell him he can just sort of tell me to stop talking, but he's too polite.
So yeah, Mo said he faced quite a few challenges when he was trying to work with these tools. And just to paraphrase a little bit what he said, the main problem LLMs have is they don't necessarily know what you want. And therefore, because they don't have the full context, they don't know what's happened before you start typing into it, and therefore what you after at the end. So when I asked it a question about dragons, Copilot instantly clamped down and said, well, I'm not going to deal with that. So this is where prompt engineering helps. So if you want to go really, really deep into this stuff, there's like hundreds of research papers out there. But I think unless you're actually building LMs and building the tools, actually that's way overkill. Having said that, our Curve Digital CTO Will, he's got a free prompt engineering course out there that's pretty good for beginners. So we'll show a link to that at the end. But their way of thinking about it is simply that, as developers, you're used to understanding and learning syntax of programming languages, and this is not really that different. It's just a less documented syntax. It's fuzzy in nature, and therefore you have to look for other ways of coming up with these rules. So one framework that we liked when we did some research is this one from the Singapore GovTech data science team, which gives us a very simple syntax for programming these LMs. They call it CoStar. And because these GPTs know so much information, yeah, they're ultimately a bit mad, aren't they? If you knew the whole internet, you go mad as well. So it's very important that you help it zoom in and to give context to what you want, and that's the C in CoStar. And the rest, if you look down, the kind of objective, style, tone, audience response, that's really just teaching it about your preferences so that that preference train that's occurred before it by people, it knows how to give that the right answer back to you. So that's it in a nutshell. So if I show you an example of that being used. Sorry, hang on. Let me just zoom so I can show the actual prompt behind it. This is the prompt that uses CoStar. So essentially, I am asking it to design me a framework for Dataverse. I'm giving it an objective in terms of how I'm expected to come back to me. That's it in a nutshell, and it's fairly simple, but we find this gives pretty good results overall, without the back and forth and getting down the wrong path. So I go forwards again. This is just showing you the outputs when I put it in different GPTs. So you can see, much like with the previous example I showed you. Okay. Much of the previous example I showed you, GPT 3.5 is much faster. Copilot's about the same because ultimately, underneath the hood, it uses 3.5 as the engine. But you can see, strangely, it's giving different results because it's been tuned a certain way and it's able to give a better answer based on that prompt. 4 still gives the best response by quite a long way in terms of the detail, in terms of the accuracy of that information. So I think that's an interesting takeaway point. So the next part I'll show you is launching a little bit into demo to see how that multi-LM workflow can work. So because each one has, obviously you can see different strengths. Some are faster than others, some give more detail than others. It's really trying to combine that into an approach that lets you get the best of both worlds. So let's stop the presentation. Let's show you VS Code. So I'm in VS Code. The main thing is installing GitHub Copilot is super easy. I'm just doing my pre-flight check, so I can see that by looking at the extensions menu, I can see that I've already installed. These 2 icons here show me that it's running. If I go down the bottom, as soon as you install it, you'll see this extra icon which you're not used to, which gives you the status, shows it's ready. And if I want to do any more checks, let's look at output, for instance. Down here, I can see that it's plugged in, and it's working. When you run it, you can see it's using that 3.5 turbo model that I discussed. So that's how you get under the hood a little bit. And if you're interested in metrics, there's another plugin I've installed, which is just for metrics, which allows you to track how much work Copilot's doing for you, which is down here. No, down here, sorry. So you can see how many lines it's generated and what you've accepted. So that's up by initial pre-flight checks. And the next thing to do is that third tool that we talked about right at the beginning of the presentation that really helps us enforce the rigor of this code. Well, we've got SonarLint running in here. So standard data engineering, software engineering tool, but it still, has a place in this workflow because that gives you the guardrails against your hallucinations. It might go through the Mo flow, but you still want that additional check at the end to make sure your code is relatively secure. There's not too many smells in it.
I was really surprised. I think Ed looked at the code and came back and said, there's no issues with it. And I was really happy. I've never had anything I've developed that came back with no issues. Well, I didn't develop it, but I like taking credit for GitHub's work.
So you can see that it's got all these different checks it's doing that's plugged into, and if I run it by just getting check for security hotspots, just in here.
Its connection is in.
Is it running? Where is it? You can see it briefly flashed up for a second. So let's check the code, and if I go into problems, there's found no problems. So it's relatively happy, but having that extra check really is quite important to make sure that you're doing good by the terms of your developers. So it might, that's what I mean in terms of Mo saying he might not be a developer, but through using these tools, he's developed code that passes SonarQube, which is something in itself. So let me take you through that workflow in a bit more detail. So let's say this is day one. We're trying to do our own project now, and I'm in GitHub Copilot. I'm going, well, I heard it's really good. Well, I've got my suggestions window on the right. I've got my chat down on the left. I'm trying to write my code. I've created this file called Dataverse data extractor. They're pretty descriptive. I'm going, well, Copilot, why don't you just write me the whole program? I'm here, and it's going, well, I've got no suggestions. So what do you do? So one way of doing it is you can just add loads of comments into here, and it will start to get a sense of what you're after. But in our workflow, we actually found it's much quicker to go into ChatGPT, and what I've got here is some custom GPTs. So the CoStar framework I showed you, if you don't want to be typing the same stuff in there all the time into GPT, what you can do is create your own GPTs. And that just saves a little bit of avoids a bit of the repetition that you would otherwise be facing. So essentially, in this implementation, I've got a C# developer, I've got a code review bot, I've got a SQL developer, and I've got a data integration solution researcher where I've actually fed those prompts in, and I can show you the C# developer one is the one I'd be using to create that initial stub code. And when I show you the definition of it, you can just see I've got a CoStar prompt in here that tells it without me having to retype it every time. It's just like a little nicety. And if I zoom in here, I can show you what is actually generated previously. So like a Blue Peter moment, where I don't have to wait for it to come back. So I've previously asked it to generate me that framework for Dataverse that extracts data with CDC and saves it to various locations. And it's gone away, and it's given me a description, and it's given me some code. So that is the code I need to drop into here. There you go. Because GPT-4 is much richer, and I want that richness for creating that stub. That custom GPT really helps. So I start typing in here, you can see that Copilot is starting to get some smarts now. It's starting to understand what I might be wanting next. It's just done that all by itself. That might not be what I want, but let's look at a different function. Let's say so if you use a descriptive term, a descriptive function is very smart. It's basically written that for me. If I wanted to multiply, it's just done the whole thing for me. If I go back and go, well, it's a random, I do have a complete random name. Right, it's much less smart. It's kind of just giving you something that's like a bit of a hello world example. So the way that Copilot knows your context is based on these different tabs that you've got open. So that's one thing. But it's also based on the cursor position. So if I do this here, it will give me a slightly different suggestion on the right than if I do it up here. The other things you can do with Copilot, so if I start, it will do documentation, it will explain this code to me. It will fix it if I can't figure it out for myself. And also write, like, everything that developers hate writing tests, also help you generate all your tests. So those are really good things to have, all nicely built into the UI already. You can see that back and forth between GPT-4 and this. Feels a bit janky, doesn't it? Whereas this is much nicer. It's just much more specialized, but much narrower. So let me show you the way the documentation works. So essentially, I can get down here. I go, oops, sorry. Generate docs. It'll just generate me a code block at the top, which is just comments. There you go. And if I want to accept that, I just press enter, and it's saving it as there. So this inline chat is essentially the same chat as here, but within this window, it's got maximum context. If I'm typing over here, you can see I've got other options because it needs more input from me to understand what I need to do next. So that's an interesting point. Generally, you'll find that if you work in this window, you'll get the best results. And over on the right, I don't know why it's not giving me suggestions. If I just close that. Start again. But if I go in here, one of the best shortcuts you'll know is the Control-Enter opens up the suggestion panel. So you can see that what it gave you in the editor windows is the top suggestion. But actually, often it will give you more, and it will give you up to 10 different options of what it thinks you want. So that's most of the demos. The way I'll close this out is by just taking you back into GPT. If I take this code and I ask it to do a code review, I've got a code review bot in here, which is built in a particular way to give me the format I want. So if I look at it, the context is that it's I'm building an enterprise-grade data integration. I want it to review the code for security, scalability concerns, and give me like a really simple to understand scale, A to E, and be as concise as possible. So I fire off that code into it. It already knows that already, and it's now going to do that for me. This will take a while, and this is what I mean about GPT-4 being a bit slower than the others. But in this case, I've consciously selected it because I want that extra quality of response. I mean, you could write that yourself, but you need to find that person, get a few hours of their time, get them to do it for you before you've got this. And I think that's really the time saving to come into it in terms of what Mo said. Sure, they help you with specific tasks that are slow for you, and they help you with enabling tasks that you as an individual can't do completely. So that's really where we see these AIs helping us. So hopefully you found that interesting. I'll take you back into tech and just summarize what we showed you.
Before we do that, I think we can do a very, very quick demo.
Oh, okay. Actually, before we do that, send you out to Mo. Mo will show you this integration working.
It works. So I'm not entirely sure what happened, but it wasn't the application. SQL did did fall over. I've created a very quick database here. It was empty. I initialized it just for the interest of time. We can see it brought the account table from the config we looked at earlier. So, pardon, sorry. If you remember here, I did ask it to synchronize account and into one database, account to and contact into the other database. If I look here, the first database has just got the account. It's got just the columns I'm interested in. The second database has got the two of them with just the columns I'm interested in. And if I go into here, this is, if anyone is not familiar with it, this is sort of the back ends of Power Apps, and we can see the data in here. If I add a new thing, let's call it SQL bits. And if I switch really, really quickly back to my database, that one here, we can see the data has come through, and in about a couple of seconds' time, we should get the new one that I've entered, all just appearing. I'm not going to take, I know we've overrun a little bit of time, but the same concept has been applied with Cosmos DB. It has been applied with a lot of other data sources. And as I said, to add more, to expand it, the key thing here is this didn't really, it gave me a solution that works. Would I sell this to a client? Definitely no. This is not a production system. This is not something I'm going to take to a client, but this is something that I can take back to my developers and say, this is what I need you to do. I need you to have your application based on configuration, and it works. Here is an example. Here's it working. I can demo it quickly to our boss and say, I need money to finish this and I need someone to work on it. And you know what? Instead of saying they're going to spend 6 months on it, they're going to spend a couple of weeks working on it. And I know we'll try and wrap really quickly. The key takeaways and the key things we need to focus on. There is a lot of LLMs. Every morning we wake up and we find a few more. We've got Ed, we've got a few at our team who are obsessed with these and go and sit and read research papers. You need to know which tool works best for you. We've seen an example here of GitHub, Copilot, and we've seen ChatGPT. ChatGPT worked really, really well in understanding my ideas, what I'm trying to tell it to do, and turn it into a semi-working code. When we looked at Copilot GitHub, it was absolutely brilliant. It integrates with the IDE, it integrates with Visual Studio, it integrates with Visual Studio Code. You would start typing and it finishes. I don't need to do that copying and pasting. Once I got what I needed to do, once I can pretend I'm a developer, it can actually produce things a lot faster for me. Will ChatGPT, will these replace us? Will it replace our jobs? Probably not yet, maybe soon, but it can make our life so much easier. It made my life so much better. I can actually, rather than having to spend hours in meetings, overnight when I'm sitting after the kids have gone to sleep, after my puppy's gone to sleep, I can actually just sit a little bit and get something semi-working. Following morning, Ed, come and have a look at this. Yeah, it works. Will, come and have a look at this. Give us some money to start developing. It made my life 100 times easier. You need the human in the loop yet. You still need someone to look and check what you're doing. Hallucinations do happen. Learn prompt engineering. This is a new tool. It's something that will just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Understand how you talk to these. They are not humans. They pretend very well to be. They can have a very good conversation with you, but they can easily lead you down a rabbit hole, and I can tell you for sure I did have that a lot. Learn prompt engineering. Learn how to talk to them to get the best output you get out of them. Spend the time, develop yourself. It's a skill you will need. It's not a skill that's going away anytime soon. Before I close off, I'm going to get back. Oh, sorry. Go on. You talk about this stuff.
So just generalize it a little bit as consultants. This is how we look at it. So we have come up with a problem. We've defined it. We've experimented. We've defined the solution. And then that's somewhere like probably where we are on this particular issue. Next step is to strategize in order to scale out.
Okay, so we've overrun, and I do really appreciate you guys staying here on a Saturday, well past the session. Any questions? Any questions? Any comments?
Feedback link on there, by the way. We'll do that.
Pardon?
So feedback link on there, or if you want to look to our LinkedIn's, or
do have a look at this.
Something.
If anyone is interested, we do need actually someone to have a look at the repo, give us some feedback on it. Do get in touch with me or Ed. Please do stay in touch. Say if you've got any comments. The repo, as I say, is not production ready. It's sitting in a private repo. Drop us a message, and I'm more than happy to share it with anyone who's been here. Now that the disclaimer is very clear. Not my code, don't judge me on it. Do have a look at it. I need some help with getting an easier way of working with the configurations. Have a look at the links here. Specifically, I think the prompt engineering, it's our friend Will Dorrington has written this. There is a free course, you can just sign up to it. It will give you a really good introduction where you get started. It's a never-ending journey. This is something that's going to stay with you for a very long time. So start working on it. Yes, sorry. Okay, I'll hand this over to Ed. I think he'll. So Ed, with all the cloud providers sort of developing, how are these models kept up to date? Is that correct? Yeah. So I think that's sort of the slide we went very quickly through.
Yeah. So they are ever evolving. So 3.54. They keep introducing more versions. 5 is due out in the summer apparently. Claude 3 came out just last week with 3 different editions. So more and more do keep coming out. In VS Code, you'll see that actually you have versions of this that do use GPT-4, but the reason we're reticent to use it generally is because if you're doing that, it gets quite expensive. Because you get charged $30 per 1 million tokens, which actually isn't that much when it comes to code. So I think they are, in short, these solutions are to some degree future-proof because they're kind of evergreen in their approach. That's how I'd look at it. Whilst new ones do come out, you might find that you might want to operate a different one in that multi-LLM workflow. You've got the freedom to do it without all being locked into one tool. If you look at it, would I say it's the slickest approach? You'd still want it more tight integrated, perhaps, but it works, and it works pretty well for us. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. One last shameless plug before we let you go. I was trying to get you a picture of my little buddy, who's sort of a team we've got in here. That's Peter. Peter is a guide dog. We're sort of in training still. He's a puppy. We're looking after him. You might have seen them outside the guide dog stands. Please do go and have a look at what they do. They do a fantastic job. We are volunteers with them. We look after Peter. I wouldn't have been here without him. I think I've been suffering quite a lot with mental health issues. I brought him to help someone else, and it turned out to be the best help I could ever think. Have a look at guide dogs, see what they do. I got involved with them, and it's just a personal thing, I know. Do have a look at what they do. They are absolutely brilliant, and it's such a rewarding thing to do. That's sort of the shameless plug before I go. So. Yeah, so please do feedback. We don't do this quite often. We've been locked since COVID. I think this is my first time being around that many people since COVID. Do please give us some feedback, positive or negative. Just let us know what we've done well, what we can do better. We know the demo didn't go quite as planned. We know we overrun, but please do feedback. We'd really, really appreciate it. And thank you very much for staying here till Saturday. Thank you all. Thanks, Ed.